Cunningham. Good afternoon.
Mr. Graham.
It has been a while. Well, to the people who are in so far, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And again, thank you to Tony Cunningham this afternoon from Wynleigh International. Tony has been a colleague of mine for many years. Tony, I was thinking of when we first met. Was it through Prof. Nell that we first met?
Yes, it was. There was a lead auditor course being run in Braamfontein with Transnet that you sat in on. And that was the first time I met you.
Right. Sure. That was some many moons ago.
Indeed.
Excellent. Well, Tony, again, thank you for your time. I've asked for the meeting this afternoon to interview you and obviously to get some perspective on Wynleigh International. Having worked with several of the certification bodies and obviously having worked with Wynleigh, I'd like to give people the opportunity to have a first-hand conversation with the certification body, in this case, the owner of a certification body.
It's an absolute pleasure, Nicholas, and thank you very much for inviting me and for sharing our brand with your clients and prospects. If I may, I'll kick off just by doing a short presentation. I've put a few slides together, and they speak specifically to the topics that you had mentioned when you invited me. What I'd like to do before we get started is simply to ask the question, just to provoke a bit of thought, on whether you or the audience has ever received a product or a service that has been less than acceptable from an ISO 9001 certified organization. I'm sure that, as I have, that this kind of thing makes you very skeptical about the value of an ISO certificate. And it's probably the reason that you've asked me to have this discussion with you. And I hope that I'm able to answer the questions that you pose later on. For my entire life, working life, I've been involved in national initiatives and really the world of ISO. That spans more than 30 years now, and giving my age away. But years ago, I was involved in establishing SATCA, the Southern African Auditor Authority, the registration body for auditors. I represented both them and the South African Society for Quality when we established SANAS. I was part of the Representative Accreditation Advisory Forum. I'm no longer a member of those organizations, but I am still involved in national initiatives. For example, I'm a member of TC 176 and TC 262, which contribute to the writing of 9001 and 31,000 respectively. And I tell you this really to demonstrate my passion for the integrity and structure that should be associated with ISO management system standards. I think that in many respects, we've got evidence that a lot of the value that was anticipated and first established with these systems has been lost. Just by way of an example, I was recently contacted by a consultant, and she said to me she's having difficulty with a certification body. She's busy doing an internal audit for her client. It's a small environmental consulting firm, and they've been told by their certification body that they need not address clauses 8.3 through to 8.7. Now, if you know anything about ISO 9001, that's kind of the main point of having ISO 9001 and a quality management system, by and large, is addressed by the clauses in Section 8. So it's certainly a point that demonstrates the kind of frustration that I think we are suffering. Sure. And it's part of the reason that I established Wynleigh. And we have an intent to really changed the face of certification. And you'll hear by the presentation that we've got a few tricks that hopefully will be meaningful to people that are listening.
Excellent. Thank you, Tony.
If I could share my screen,
Sure.
I'm going to then put a few slides up, if you don't mind.
Go for it.
Let me know if you're seeing my screen.
There we go. You're on.
Oh, fantastic. There we go.
Perfect. Thanks, Tony.
All right. I've started with the road to certification, and it's really a topic that I think intrigues a lot of people that are not yet on that road. And I'd like to hope that any organization that chooses to walk this road does so by way of a strategic decision. They're intentional about implementing a system that not only will add value to their organization, protect against potential liability, but yes, it can achieve certification as well. And I often talk to people about trophy hunting, and we're not in the business of trophy hunting.
Sure.
If you're looking at certification for the sake of certification only, then you're missing a trick. And I think the value proposition should be very different to that one. So for companies walking this path, they should do so with specific intention to derive value from what they are doing. Quite frankly, there are other ways of spending your marketing money if you're doing it just for a certificate.
Sure.
And I think in going down that path, there's a lot that one can learn from others, from your competitors, from your colleagues. And of course, we work with a group of people like yourselves. SRMC is one of the reputable consulting and training organizations that certainly through your participation over the years and the work with us in auditing for us as well, is able to demonstrate the kind of value proposition that I'm talking about. So through partnerships, there are a range of services that can be acquired: consulting, training, software. And really, this is what one would typically embark on first in order to start seeing the value before you get to certification. So I think the end of that road, when it comes to the initial work, would probably be culminated in some kind of a gap analysis. So we see that consultants do that. We can offer that as a certification body as well. The difference being that a certification body should not be consulting.
Sure.
And if we're going to give independent and objective views, we're simply going to tell you where the gaps are and not necessarily how to fill them.
Sure.
So if a consultant does that work, they're able to guide and take the organization further. So a plug for the consultants and training organizations there, because we need one another. And it's fair to say that the better the consulting company, the better the training, the more likely it is that it's going to be smooth sailing through the certification process.
Sure.
Which I think it is worth discussing, the actual steps in the process itself. And please feel free to stop me and ask questions. Obviously, we can ask questions at the end, but it might be relevant when I'm on a particular slide to address any questions as we go along.
Thanks, Tony.
It all starts with receiving an application. Now, I'm all too aware that these applications appear to be quite daunting, simply by the time that it takes for people to return them. They're obviously more than just a few tick boxes. The point is that for certification bodies that are walking the path of the ISO 17021 standard, they're informed not only by the requirements of that standard, but also for companies that are working under the accreditation authorities of the International Accreditation Forum will be informed by several guides, which I'll talk about as we go along. But the main guide that we take into consideration at this point informs both the need for that detailed application and then how much time we're going to spend in the audit. So the quote that is prepared with a depth of insight to the organization that helps us understand the competencies that are required for the audit, help us understand the nature of work that we anticipate going through in the actual audit, and very importantly, the duration that we should be spending on the audit. So once we've got that away, then if it's accepted, we enter into a formalized contract. Anyone can see that contract. It's on our website, and that really just spells out the obligations of both parties. And once that's out the way, we get on with the planning and implementation of our services. Companies enter our books in one of two ways. The one could be by way of transfer from another certification body. So where the company already has accredited certification, we can take them on by simply going through a pre-transfer review. Again, this is specified by the IAF mandatory documents. But essentially, once the company has got through that review successfully, the certificate is issued, and we pick up on where the previous certification body left off. So they could be readying themselves for their second surveillance when they decide to make a transfer. We simply pick up at the planned date that surveillance to and continue with the certification cycle from there. So that's fairly straightforward in terms of a transfer. Alternatively, for the new client, they're going to enter into a two-stage process, which starts with a stage one audit. And that stage one audit, I'll talk a little bit more about. How do we get to that point? We're informed by the mandatory documentation. That's going to tell us how much time to spend, be it a quality, environmental, or health and safety system that we're auditing. The detail that we're dependent on, firstly, it starts with understanding the number of effective personnel. Now, depending on which standard that is that we're looking at, it may include contractors, it may include temporary sites. So it's quite specific, and that's the reason that the application form is as detailed as it is.
Correct.
We're able then to consider that and either increase or decrease the duration based on the nature of what we're seeing. It's primarily informed by risk, but we're able to adjust those numbers then. The maximum adjustment that we're allowed to make is 20% for a single site certification. If it's multiple site, then there are other permutations. There's sampling that comes into it, and we're able to change the numbers a little bit more. But what we need to consider is, if a client receives a proposal from competitors, they need to be aware that the duration, the number of hours being used for audits, should be the same across all of those certification bodies, because they should all be asking the same questions. They should all be informed by these same mandatory documents, and thus the only difference might be the actual rate, the fee that they charge per hour. Otherwise, they should be the same. If it's substantially different, then there's something not right.
There's possibly a point for discussion, Tony, because I have the role of playing the consultant. I design systems for companies, and then I will go and engage with various different certification bodies in order to obtain quotations from them for the clients. And I have to say, it's quite surprising that certification bodies, when all looking at the same scope of work, there can be some differentials between the costs, again, based on the number of man days, etc. So I think that's something you've hit the nail on the head. And it was really the statement for this particular webinar is not all certification bodies are created equal at the end of the day. Now, you might not be able to say that, but I can. And that's been my experience in receiving quotations from some certification bodies.
Thank you. Yes, yes, indeed. You'd probably be able to point out where those differences come in, but around the initial quote, we often see companies charging for application fees. So they'll put an administrative fee onto their man-day rate or their rate per day.
Yeah.
But when it comes to actual auditor days, that's what we need to look out for and ensure that they are the same. The IAF MD5 also specifies what an auditor day is. It quantifies it as 8 hours of auditing, and that excludes the lunch breaks and the travel and the preparation and what have you. It's 8 hours of work where you're interacting the auditor with the auditing material. That's quite important, I think, to recognize as well.
Sure.
Moving on in this process, if I may, I just wanted to show you an example of what appears in the MD5 document. This particular one is for environmental systems. So this guides us, firstly, the left-hand column based on the effective number of personnel. And then there are other tables that inform the level of risk and the associated aspects and impacts to guide us on whether it's a high, medium, or low perspective that we should be taking. Recognizing that the days in the table are a collective stage 1 and stage 2, which are usually divided about a third, 2/3 between a stage 1 and stage 2 respectively.
Right.
Moving on in the process then, the stage 1 audit is really a readiness audit. And you might say, well, if we've done a gap analysis, why are we doing another readiness audit? ISO 17021 requires that there is a 2-stage process. It's also very important that that first stage informs the auditors in readiness for the stage 2. So things that we look at there are, do we have the right profile of competency? Have we anticipated the amount of work correctly? You can have 100 people in an organization and 99 of them dig trenches. They're doing the same thing. It's menial task, it's labor that, you know, you might otherwise assume that you need to spend a long amount of fair duration doing the audit, whereas it's the same stuff being done in the same way, and you can reduce that quite dramatically. Now, unless you have the depth of insight, you may get that wrong. And so the stage 1 is about learning of the risks, of the profile of the organization, and indeed the real nuts and bolts of what the organization does.
Yeah.
So that informs both parties. It helps the auditee to understand the working arrangements, the kind of documents and tools that are used by the auditors, and the working rapport then is developed between the two organizations, or should be at that point. There may be corrective action requests that come out of that. Any major concerns do need to be cleared away before the stage 2, but usually what we see there is that happens at the stage 2, where we then clear out any major non-conformities before proceeding with the audit. So it happens all at the same time. But the stage 2 is the big event. That's the main certification audit. It's based on this intervention that in the absence of any major non-conformities, we would be recommending as an audit team certification to the relevant standard or standards.
Right.
Of course, if the organization doesn't quite make it, even if they have a major non-conformity, they have 90 days in which they can use to close that out anyhow. Minor non-conformities are not going to prevent recommendation for certification, irrespective of their number.
Right.
So things to look at here, it's important that auditors are competent not only in audit techniques, but they also have sector-specific expertise, that they're familiar with the organization's sector. Otherwise, their ability to add value to that organization is typically going to be less than it could. Another important feature, and I'm seeing a problem with this in the marketplace, is impartiality.
Yes.
An auditor should not be referee and player. The impartiality is to prevent organizations that use the same people to both consult and audit and certify.
Yes.
You can't be all things to all people. And whilst, I mean, your company is a consulting company, and you work for us on occasion as a certification auditor, the point is that you wouldn't go into the same organization having consulted to them and now certify them as well.
Yeah.
So there need to be checks and balances, and the auditee needs to be confident that those work for them. Once the certificate is issued, it has a validity of 3 years, and that then is subject to a number of surveillance visits. These are at least one a year. So somewhere in a 12-month region would be a follow-up surveillance audit. And essentially, we've looked at the whole system in the first audit, the stage 2 certification activity. We've looked at the entire system. We now, over the following period, split up our activities so that we look at the entire system, but across several surveillance visits. So we're now drilling down into more detail, or should be, so that we can get further insight to the nitty-gritty that we may not necessarily have got into in the stage 2 audit.
Correct.
You'll see that Wynleigh has an additional feature in there. We call it our risk assurance service, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. But essentially, when we get towards the end of the 3-year validity of the certificate, we usually give a 3-month advance recertification audit to prepare the organization. If there are any major non-conformities, then that period of time is used to revalidate the certificate so that the organization doesn't end up without a certificate at all. So that then revalidates for the future 3 years, and a new certificate with a new validity is then issued.
Excellent.
All right. Of course, we can't have any major non-conformities during that time either. We need to close them out. If they're not closed out, the certificate can be suspended, and we have been known to suspend organizations. We believe that the credibility of the organization and, of course, our brand and certificate needs to be upheld. So we need to follow the rules that are set for us and ensure major non-conformities are closed out in good time. Why third-party certification? Hopefully, I answer all of the questions that you had in mind here in terms of why it is that a company would like to gain certification. Firstly, I think the majority of companies go for certification because it removes the potential barrier to trade. More and more clients are saying to their supply chain, we'd like to see typically ISO 9001 for quality management, ISO 14001 for environmental management, and ISO 45001, or some permutation between those in place. And it certainly opens doors to trade, and that's what our clients are telling us.
Sure.
Over and above the market access that a client would get, I certainly believe that with a certificate that the market can trust, that has integrity, it demonstrates for them that they can have confidence when they select an organization as a supplier that has that kind of certificate in place. So it's important who the organization chooses to issue the certificate, because if the brand is questionable, then the marketplace gets to know about that, and you don't want to be associated with an inappropriate way of working.
Correct.
Another benefit aside from certification that we see of the independent third-party audit is companies sometimes rest on their laurels. They start to let things unravel a little, and the third-party independent visit, being as regular as it is, keeps them on their toes, to coin a phrase. So we have at least one client that's saying we want to shorten the frequency, the duration between the periodic visits. We'd like to rather go for 6 monthly visits instead of a visit every 12 months. And that's really for that purpose, that there's no sitting back and relaxing and waiting for the certification body to revisit in 12 months' time, because things they're in order for a quarter or so, and then the next audit's on you. So I think that's something to think about.
Sure.
Then, of course, external audits, if they're experienced in your sector, then each audit that they bring offers the experience that they're gaining from possibly your competitors.
Sure.
If they're working in that sector, they might be trainers, they might be consultants. They won't only be doing audits. They'll be doing different activities that builds their experience, and you can learn from that as an auditee of that kind of auditor. So I think primarily those are the benefits that a third-party audit will bring to the table. With tongue-in-cheek, I'm saying, are all conformity assessment bodies equal? Well, you judge for yourself. I'd like to introduce you to Wynleigh.
Yeah.
I'd like to talk a little about the differences in what we offer, not necessarily pointing out that they are different, but just saying to you that this is what we do. We'd be glad if you go out and compare us to others. Just give us the opportunity. The first thing that I think you need to do when selecting a certification body is don't ask the certification body how good they are, because they'll tell you.
Very good.
Equally, if you ask others who are certified by that certification body, they'll probably tell you how good they are as well, because they want to boast about the certificate that they've got.
Yeah.
I think you need to ask the customers of that audited organization who has the certificate. They'll tell you whether it's fair or not. And therein lies an opportunity that I'm going to touch on shortly. Another question, how are the auditors selected? I said to you earlier that I was part of the establishment of SATCA back in the day. At the time, there was a lot of discussion going on around the world where certification body auditors were having to re-qualify, moving from country to country. And so there was an international structure put together called IATCA, and that was used to create equivalent rules for auditor certification around the world. SATCA was part of that and adopted those rules. The point is, these days, one can place reliance on internal arrangements to qualify your auditors, if you so choose. For us, we believe that you need to do a bit more. So there are external registration schemes which ensure that the auditors maintain their competence, maintain their proficiency up to date, familiar with the latest versions of the standard, And that's an independent evaluation outside of what a certification body would be doing. So ask your certification body, how are they evaluating and agreeing on what the auditor should have? Is it an independent process that they're following, or is it their own in-house process?
Sure.
Or both? Yeah. So the other part of that is obviously what I've touched on already, sector competency. Sector competency brings value to the audit, and if the person is a banker and now they're auditing a mine, I'm not sure how much value they're going to add. But the point is that if we use horses for courses, things would work out better for the client.
Excellent.
How is impartiality assured? So is there a process in place? Do they assure that the auditor is not consulting to the company that they're going to audit? Very important. What internal system does the certification body use for their own quality management? Does it conform to ISO 17021 Part 1? Does it employ the guidance of the mandatory documents of the International Accreditation Forum? All important questions to ask. And then I think last, although it's not an exclusive list, the last point on the slide, how does the CB stay abreast of ISO standards? Do they participate? Do they engage? How do they learn about the standards? The standards are bound to change, and as we learn about the content, so the content is embellished on, it's improved on. Do they understand that? Do they contribute to it? So I think those are some telling questions that might help in the selection process. Wynleigh, as a certification body, offers services in the region. We're a privately held company. We obviously adhere to the local legislation for employment, and part of that means that we're BEE compliant as well. We promote our services into the English-speaking market. There are lots of countries around us that have varying languages, but all our auditors are English-speaking. That doesn't say we wouldn't at all move into other countries that speak French, for example. We can work with an interpreter who we'd take along ourselves. We wouldn't rely on the client's interpreter, obviously. Then we have 4 values by which we live, and I'm going to expand on 1 or 2 of these with subsequent slides, but essentially credibility is what we sell.
Sure.
If we're unable to prove our integrity and our certificates don't have the credibility that the marketplace is looking for, what are we all about? So that's first and foremost in our minds all the time. Value adding speaks for itself. Every audit should add value. The proposition offered to the client should improve their system, should contribute with ideas that they can then use to improve their performance. And that means that we need to be innovating, researching, exploring all the time to stay ahead of the competition and to understand what improvements can be made. Then I believe that an audit can be seen and received as very negative. And I think the way that our auditors behave, the way that they engage, and the contribution that they make in a positive sense by reinforcing good practice and by motivating the issues at hand in a positive light, builds positivity in the organization, builds the culture, and ultimately assists in the implementation of whatever system the company is seeking certification against. So our value proposition then is to offer the certification against the 3 standards that I was referring to earlier. We do this to all type and size of organization. Of course, we're not all things to all people. There are certain sectors that we need to search for additional support on in order to get the competency in for the audit team. but the fact is we cover most of them, and I'll show you a slide shortly in that regard. We're also fairly unique in offering the excellence through stewardship audits, where this biotechnology-based quality management system is certified by ETS and the group that runs that. It's primarily for those that are doing gene editing in plant material, propagating and expanding on that kind of idea. There are only 2 auditors in Africa. I happen to be one of them, but yeah, we're unique in offering that as well. Something else that's unique, as I've mentioned, is our risk assurance service. What's that all about? It's a choice of the organization to go down this road, to use this service. It's a free service. It's part of what we do anyhow. The fee that you pay for us to audit you includes this service if you want it. It, firstly, for ISO 9001 and quality management, is seeking to understand how you're performing in your market as an auditee. So we ask our clients if they'd like us to contact their customers, and we offer them 5 of their key accounts for us to promote their brand into, and the fact that they are certified. So we're building their credibility on their behalf as their certification body. What's, I think, particularly important here is we want to engage with the customer. We want to talk to them to understand what their expectations are and to appreciate what their experience has been. So a lot of our clients receive second-party audits by their customers. And if we're engaging with their customer, that need goes away because we can act on their behalf. We can include in our audit planning and our checklists the kind of questions that they'd like focused on simply by communicating.
Yeah.
So that's an annual thing. We engage on an annual basis with 5 of their key accounts, and we then give our clients that feedback so they can create improvement. It's independent, and the customers of our clients also seem to like the idea.
Great idea.
The second part of it is around managing risk. Now, all of the management system standards that ISO has published from 2010 are based on Directive 1 Annex SL, which you and I, Nick, know as the high-level structure.
Yeah.
And that's informed by and large by corporate governance requirements, one of which is obviously protecting against loss and seeking value, and we use the terms risk and opportunity.
Sure.
The fact is that the majority of organizations with ISO certification are not necessarily getting the benefit of that risk mitigation that they brought to the table. What we say is we're willing to engage with your underwriter. We can talk to them on your behalf. And equally, we can use the input of the underwriter to look at what they're interested in when we're auditing.
Sure.
So that's part of the free service as well. We call it our risk assurance service. Further to that, in terms of credibility, I spoke earlier about our auditors. Our auditors, before we talk to them, before we consider them for use in auditing, need to be registered with an ISO 17024 accredited auditor registration body. Typical examples: SAPCA, the Chartered Quality Institute, International Register of Certificated Auditors, and similar. The point is we want some external party to ensure that there's continuous professional development, that there's a bit of oversight that's independent from ourselves. We can otherwise get all cuddly with each other, and we can send anyone an audit simply because we're being compromised in finding people to do the audit. So we need to look at that, and we do so very closely. We then also have internal requirements whereby we evaluate the auditor competence and you'll know that I, in particular, will come alongside the auditors during audits and go through the evaluation process as a live audit evaluation as well. Then another important feature, a lot of companies will say to us, if we get the same auditor year in and year out for 10, 20 years, then they start to miss things because they become so complacent. And we want an element of sustainability. So if there's an audit team with 2 people, we might change the 1 member and retain the other. To have this sustainability, we understand your system, we've developed the experience by being there repeatedly. But on the other side, we're also bringing fresh eyes. So that's something that we manage as well. Independence, our auditors sign for every audit that they do a declaration of impartiality to say that they're not auditing a company on our behalf that they've consulted to in the last 2 years. Their recommendations, their audit report, their documentation that they produce then goes to an independent approvals board, a group of people who are not involved in the audit itself. They would then review all of the administrative detail, all of the processes that have been undergone to ensure due diligence, and they would either uphold or turn down the recommendations of the audit team. Over and above that, we also have an impartiality committee. So on an annual basis, there's a separate team of people who don't work for Wynleigh. Their sole role is in looking at impartiality, and they go through our records and our processes to give us the added assurance and guidance on what it means to be impartial and independent.
Sure.
So those are some of the extra steps that we take around impartiality. Then our internal procedures, policies, systems are developed to comply to ISO 17021 Part 1, which is used by conformity assessment bodies to conduct certification audits. So we follow that strictly, as we do the IAF mandatory documents that supplement that standard. And then just the point that I was making in the previous slide, that it helps for the auditors to be informed on a first-hand basis. And that's the reason that we, not me only, but some of the auditors participate in these technical committees to get the first-hand knowledge from the teams that actually engage in the content of the standards, in its writing, in its interpretation and growth. So that's an important differentiator as well. These slides, and I'm going to flip through them quite quickly, lists some of our auditors and shows you their capability in terms of the industry sector that they have competency in. So if you look down the left-hand side, you'll see the EAC or IAF sector codes, and you'll see that there are generally a good spread of competencies across the 3 standards that we certify, demonstrating the competence that we require in those sectors.
Excellent.
Lastly, then, if you talk to our clients, they say some really nice stuff about us. These are on our website. There are these lengthy statements. I just extracted a couple of sentences from some of them, and you'll see that our customers are truly satisfied with the way that we are doing things. And I think that we're making our mark. I think that the approach that we're taking will have its effect, and it will start to change the value proposition that certification has in the market. From my side, Nick, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
For inviting and for listening, and thanks to everyone that's on the call. Questions from your side?
Excellent, Tony. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the floor up to questions. If anybody has got questions, you can just raise your hand and then I'll unmute you. Maybe just a question from me, or maybe actually it's more of a statement, if I could say that. My experience as a consultant with regards to certification bodies and what the differentiator is would hedge possibly around two things, maybe three. Yes, I agree with you totally on the credibility factor. My experience has been the biggest differentiators is on the quality of the administration of the certification body, and then also on the quality of their auditors, because really that's the part where the tacky hits the tar. And I mean, if I look at you with over 30 plus years in the quality field, Professor Johan Nell, who also audits for you on 14,000, and Johan also, I mean, you help get involved with 9,000. Johan has helped write ISO 14,000 as one, has been one of the contributors around that. The quality of the auditor really helps to establish the credentials and the value proposition of the certification body. So that's been my experience.
Thank you. Thank you.
Are there any questions from any of the people who've logged in? If not, one of the questions I would ask you to clarify for people, and I'll just observe this side of the screen if anybody does have questions. Maybe a regular question for me from clients, and I obviously know the answer, but it'd be good to hear it from you. What would be the difference between a minor and a major nonconformity? Is what would constitute a minor nonconformity? What would constitute a major nonconformity?
Good. Yeah, it's a question that's often asked, and the answer is not easy to define, but let me give it a go. Firstly, a nonconformity must be supported by audit evidence. If the auditor is not providing evidence of the conclusion that they are making, that's the first problem that we have. So provided there's evidence of the failure, that would automatically be a minor nonconformity.
Right.
What makes it major? The previous version of ISO 17021 referred to it as a system breakdown. And therein lies a problem. What's a system breakdown to me might not be a system breakdown to you. So there's an element of subjectivity. What I like to then lean on in making the decision is, does the outcome of that particular nonconformity compromise the ability of that system in achieving what the standard has asked for? In other words, if we're looking at client satisfaction for 9001, we're looking at product quality, service quality, and the nonconformity is now going to negatively and directly impact the quality of the product. That to me is a major nonconformity, because the whole reason that we have the system is to prevent that kind of negative impact. Equally, if we look at an environmental system, perhaps, if the nonconformity, a failure in implementing a procedure, for example, that if there's evidence of it, it's immediately a minor nonconformity. But what is the consequence? Is that failure going to allow for the system and its processes to impact the environment, or to increase, if it is already impacting the environment as a result of the working arrangements and how things are? If the impact is going to increase, then that to me is a failing in the system that is actually not preventing the main purpose of having that system. And that for me is a system breakdown. It's a major nonconformity. Hopefully that helps.
I think that will definitely help, guys. I think one of the other regular misconceptions that, and a lot of clients ask that, is in the stage one audit, what is the level of implementation that you test at stage one? Because you've differentiated between stage one and stage two, but obviously stage two, you're testing implementation, but there's still a level of implementation that's tested at stage one. What do you look for?
Yeah. All right. So in stage one, to recommend to the client that we are going ahead with a stage two, we're looking at, has the system been developed? Are the management arrangements available to give us a reasonable level of confidence that when we come to check implementation, that which has been established is going to give the outcome that the standard is asking for. So that's primarily it. We like to see at least 3 months worth of working records in place.
Sure. Yeah.
But that's not always possible, and sometimes there's a lot of pressure on the client. Perhaps they haven't finalized all their audits, or maybe they haven't done a management review yet. We're willing to see the results of that in the stage 2. So we might raise a non-conformity that it hasn't happened yet because it's an implementation question. It hasn't happened yet, but it will happen between the stage 1 and stage 2. If we have that assurance and we can see that that's happened as the first thing that we open with in the stage 2 audit, then we'd be happy to proceed.
Okay, excellent. Another question that regularly comes up when my clients are looking to appoint a certification body is, some of the guys will say, well, we want international recognition for our certificate. And maybe you could speak into national accreditation bodies, the IAF, and the alignment there, what should be on the certificates so they are recognized.
Right. Thanks for that question. The International Accreditation Forum has approximately 60 member countries contributing. It is not a higher level authority, it's a forum, so it's a grouping of like-minded accreditation authorities who get together. They lobby the World Trade Organization, they lobby ISO, they put the mandatory documents together to give guidance to those certification bodies that they would accredit. There are also other members to the Memoranda of Understanding between those 60 countries. So it's not an absolutely exclusive club, but the fact is level 1 members of the IAF as accreditation bodies allow for then the ease of transfer between one certification body and another. So the respect that is paid between nations and the use of the certificates is not only reliant on the ISO standard, but also on the International Accreditation Forum. Yeah. We in South Africa, for example, have SANAS. SANAS is a full level 1 member of the International Accreditation Forum. And therefore, the transfer between one certification body and another is made that much easier because there's the ability to place reliance on one another.
Excellent. So in essence, there a Wynleigh certificate, if somebody is looking, they could take a Wynleigh certificate and they could show it to somebody over in the UK, and it holds as much credibility over in the UK as a UCAS or whoever it is certificate.
That's right. We are in the process, we've gone some way, as it were, through the process of getting SANAS accreditation. Yeah. And that would be true for a SANAS accredited certificate, absolutely. Right. Yeah.
Excellent. Tony, I think that kind of wraps up my questions. Is there anything that you'd like to add at the end?
It's just been an absolute pleasure being able to present to this audience. I hope that they've achieved the value proposition that I promised up front, and that they derive some added understanding and learning out of the process. And we look forward to interacting with you and your prospective clients in the future.
Excellent.
Thank you very much.
Tony, just how can people get hold of you if they're looking to get in touch with Wynleigh?
The easiest way, if you have a look on our slides, you'll see our web address. I'll put the slide up again. You'll see the web address down the bottom, wynleigh.com. That's WYNLEIGH.com. Alternatively, once you get onto the website, you'll certainly have all the contact points there: Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and so on.
Excellent, Tony. Thank you so much. And again, it was incredibly informative. Obviously, I've had the pleasure of working with you for many years, but I can definitely vouch for the credibility of Wynleigh and the services that you offer and the credibility that you add to the various different businesses. So again, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Nicholas.
Pleasure. Thanks, Tony.